In 1926, the governor of Arizona, a man named George W.P. Hunt, drove out to the mountains of the eastern part of his state to celebrate. A new highway had just opened between Springerville and Clifton. It had been cut through some of the most difficult country in Arizona: spruce forest, switchbacks, canyon walls. For the towns at either end, it was the first reliable way through. It was a good day. There were speeches. Somebody took a photograph. There was no crash that afternoon. Nobody died. The pavement was brand new, and the road was, by every measure available in 1926, an achievement. 12 years later, that highway was assigned a number, and the number was 666. Within a generation, people were calling it the Devil's Highway. They said a black sedan ran drivers off it. They said hellhounds waited in the tree line. They said a trucker who did not exist came up behind you at night and did not stop. And underneath every one of those stories was a real fact. People were dying on that road. In the worst stretch of it, 15 to 20 a year, every year. In 1992, Arizona changed the number. Coming up, a road with 460 curves and almost no guardrail. A haunting so profitable that people rammed their vehicles into signposts to steal the sign. And the true reason those people were dying, which had nothing to do with the number on the shield, and which the rename did not touch. So here is the quiet contradiction at the heart of this road. It is one of the most beautiful drives in the United States. Picture the drive the way you would actually make it. You start in Clifton, in the high desert, next to one of the largest open-pit copper mines on Earth. The road climbs hard into the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest. Ponderosa gives way to spruce and fir. You crest near Hannigan Meadow at 9,370 feet, in a place so undeveloped that there is exactly one lodge along the entire stretch. Arizona's own tourism office recommends it. It is a National Scenic Byway. Motorcyclists plan whole trips around it. The State Highway Department describes it as exhilarating. That is the actual word. And traffic is scarce. A DOT notes that people camping or picnicking along it are rarely disturbed by the sound of a passing vehicle. That is the contradiction in one sentence. This is simultaneously a road the state promotes to tourists, and a road where you can sit beside the pavement for a long time without seeing anybody at all. Now hold both of those in your head, because the second one is what makes the first one dangerous. Danger you can see, you slow down for. Ice, fog, a hairpin turn, a construction zone. Your foot moves before your brain finishes the thought. A scenic byway designation does the opposite. It is an official assurance that this road is for enjoying. And here's the one fact I want you to hold on to, because we come all the way back to it at the end. Almost nobody who died on this road was killed by anything the rename could reach. Hold on to that one. Start with the number itself, because that is where the whole thing begins. Here's the wildcard fact. There was never anything sinister about it. It was arithmetic. When the U.S. highway system was laid out in the 1920s, the major north-south roads branching off Route 66 were numbered in sequence: 166, 266, 366, and onward. This one was the 6th, so it became 666. That is the entire origin. A clerk counting. Nobody involved appears to have thought about the Book of Revelation for a moment, and for the first decade or so, it did not seem to matter. The road ran from Douglas, on the Mexican border, north through Arizona and up into the Four Corners. It was long, remote, and mostly empty. Now compare that to how a road gets named today. Every highway designation in America now runs past people whose job is to think about how a name will land. Memorial designations, tourism boards, marketing considerations. A number is never just a number anymore. In 1926, it was just a number. The road got the next one available, the way a fence post gets the next hole. Roughly 600 miles of highway. One clerical decision, and nobody in the room who read Revelation. And then there is the road itself, which is genuinely dangerous, and always was. Here is the wildcard fact. The stretch that survives today as the Coronado Trail Scenic Byway contains, by the state's own count, 460 curves. Some observers counting only the 90 miles between Clifton and Alpine have put over 400 of them in that section alone, most of which have to be taken at 25 miles an hour or less. In places, the advisory speed drops to 10. That is not a figure of speech. 10 miles an hour on a U.S. highway. Now here's what makes it different from a bad mountain road anywhere else. Arizona Highways, describing the route for its own readers, notes sharp curves and steep drop-offs, and that in some cases there are no guardrails at all. There are also, effectively, no shoulders. The road is paved and narrow and hairpinned, with blind curves, and it takes 3 to 4 hours to cover a distance you would drive in 90 minutes almost anywhere else. At elevation. At 9,000 feet, ice and snow are common not just in winter, but through the spring and fall shoulder seasons, which is to say, in the months when a driver from Phoenix is least likely to be expecting them. 460 curves, 9,000 feet, and long stretches with nothing between the pavement and the drop. And the mountains are only a quarter of it. Here is another fact worth sitting with. The Coronado Trail accounts for less than a quarter of the length of US 191. The full highway runs 517 miles from the Mexican border at Douglas all the way to the Utah state line. It is the longest highway in Arizona, which means the road people picture when they hear Devil's Highway, the switchbacks, the spruce, the drop-offs, is the minority of it. The rest is the part nobody photographs. Long desert running between Douglas and Wilcox and Safford. Empty two-lane country with heat, distance, and very little in between. Now compare the two halves honestly, because they fail in opposite directions. The mountain section is dangerous in the way a difficult road is dangerous. It demands attention constantly, and it punishes you immediately when you stop paying it. The desert section is dangerous in the way an easy road is dangerous. It asks nothing of you for an hour at a time. One road, two entirely different ways to die on it, and a single number on the shield that told you nothing about either. But that is not the reputation the road got, because a difficult road is not a story. Here is the wildcard fact. The legend became so valuable that people committed property damage to own a piece of it. Highway signs marked 666 were stolen constantly, across every state the road passed through. In one case, a thief simply rammed a vehicle into the signpost to knock it down. State transportation departments replaced them, and they vanished again. And the folklore kept escalating. A sinister black car people called Satan's sedan, hellhounds with glowing red eyes, ghostly hitchhikers, strange fogs, a mad trucker who chased families and disappeared, a little girl in a white dress who walks the road at night and is gone when you pull over. Then, in 2001, a horror film built around the number, which pushed the whole thing into the mainstream. Now compare that to the road's actual documented hazards: ice at 9,000 feet, blind curves with no guardrail, an advisory of 10 miles per hour, long distances between services. Every one of those is real, boring, and fixable with money. And not one of them is a story anybody repeats at a campfire. That is the trade the legend made. It gave this road enormous fame, and in exchange, it made the road's genuine dangers completely invisible, because once a highway is haunted, nobody asks where the guardrails went. Stolen signs, a horror movie, and a set of real hazards nobody was talking about. Which brings us to what was actually happening, and it is nothing like the legend. Here is the wildcard fact. In 1995, a reporter went to the deadliest section of Route 666 to find out what was killing people, and the answer was in the first paragraph. That section was not in Arizona. It was the 135 miles running north from Gallup, New Mexico, through the Navajo Nation. And the numbers there were stark, somewhere between 15 and 20 traffic deaths a year on that stretch alone. But here's the detail that reframes the entire legend. Pedestrians were involved in about 75% of them, not drivers, people on foot. In that region, many people could not afford a vehicle, and hitchhiking was ordinary, a normal way to get to work, to a store, to a relative's house. So the road carried walkers along its edges, on a rural highway with no sidewalk, no shoulder to speak of, and no lighting. Alcohol was heavily involved, and local law enforcement was blunt about the scale of it. In McKinley County, with a population around 65,000, police were arresting close to 2,500 impaired drivers a year. Tom Arviso Jr., then managing editor of the Navajo Times, told that reporter something worth hearing exactly as he framed it. He did not believe in the curse. He said it was a dangerous stretch of highway and he was not sure why. That much of it came down to alcohol abuse, and that if changing the name was the only thing that could be done, and it made people feel better, then it was worth doing. That is not superstition. That is a man watching his community bury 15 to 20 people a year and being offered a new sign. And notice what that pattern actually is, because it is not exotic and it is not regional. A person walking along a rural highway at night is the most vulnerable road user in America, anywhere it happens. No headlights, no metal around them, no shoulder built for them, because rural highways are almost never designed with anyone on foot in mind. Everything about that road assumes you arrived in a vehicle. Change one variable, whether a household can afford a car, and the same road that is merely long and boring becomes lethal. Not because of anything on the map, because of who has to use it and how. 135 miles, 15 to 20 deaths a year, and 3 out of 4 of them never in a vehicle at all. So in 1992, Arizona went first. Here is the wildcard fact. The Arizona Department of Transportation is entirely open about why, and the reasons are not what the title of this video implies. By ADOT's own account, the state petitioned to renumber the route partly to get away from the connotations of the number, and partly because the signs kept being stolen. Arizona's stretch, from Douglas all the way to the New Mexico line, became US 191 in 1992, and it remains US 191 today. New Mexico followed in 2003, when Governor Bill Richardson asked Colorado and Utah to join a renumbering, arguing the reputation was harming the people who lived along the road and the economy around it. That section became US 491. So the honest answer to why the number changed is, the deaths built the reputation was the problem, and the sign was the part anybody could actually change. Now here's the comparison that should stay with you. Everybody assumes a renaming is a memorial, a road named after someone lost on it, so people remember. This was the exact opposite. This was a renaming designed so people would forget. Not the victims, the number. And here's the part that is easy to miss. In the sections through Utah and Colorado, fatality rates on the road were actually lower than those states' averages for highways. In New Mexico, the rate was higher, and analysts attributed that not to anything supernatural, but to an aging road carrying heavier loads than it was built for. 3 states, 1 number, and a curse that only existed where the road was already failing. So the obvious question is whether it worked. Here's the last fact, and it is the most uncomfortable one. In one sense, it did. The sign theft stopped almost immediately, for the simple reason that nobody wants to steal a sign that says 191. That was a real problem, and the rename genuinely solved it. And there are claims that fatalities on the New Mexico stretch dropped substantially afterward, which some people have pointed to as evidence that the number really was doing something. Now look carefully at what else was happening in those same years, because this is where correlation gets very seductive. The rename in New Mexico happened in 2003. Across that same period, that corridor was the target of sustained, expensive work that had nothing to do with signage, sobriety checkpoints, special patrols, alcohol awareness programs, and years of road improvements on an aging roadbed. Arizona's own rename came in 1992, more than a decade earlier, and the Arizona sections were never where the fatality problem was concentrated in the first place. So when the numbers came down, there were a dozen candidate explanations, and only one of them was free. Compare that to how you would judge any other safety intervention. If a city repaints a crosswalk, adds a signal, hires more officers, and lowers a speed limit in the same year, nobody credits the paint. Here, the paint is exactly what got credited, because it makes a far better story than a decade of checkpoints. Fewer stolen signs, fewer deaths, and no honest way to draw a line between them. So here is the actual answer. Every danger you naturally respect hands you a signal your body already knows. Ice makes the wheel go light. Fog you can watch closing in. A curve you can see coming. Rain you can hear on the roof. Your foot lifts off the gas before you have consciously decided anything. The legend gave people the opposite of that. It gave them a signal pointing at nothing. For decades, the story of this road told drivers that the danger was supernatural, arriving from outside, unpredictable, and impossible to prepare for. If the threat is a black sedan that appears out of nowhere, there is nothing to do but hope. Meanwhile, the real dangers sat in plain view the entire time, and every one of them had a price tag. A missing guardrail on a drop-off is a budget line. A pedestrian walking a rural highway at night because there's no other way to get to work is a transportation and poverty problem. 2,500 DUI arrests a year in a county of 65,000 is a public health emergency with decades of history behind it. An aging roadbed carrying loads it was never designed for is an engineering backlog. None of those are cheap. All of them are known, and that is the mechanism. And it is not really about Arizona at all. A road with a curse gets attention, headlines, a horror film, and a renumbering. A road with a funding shortfall gets a study. Changing the number costs the state almost nothing. New signs, a paperwork petition, a few maps were printed. It solved the sign theft, and it probably did give people along that road some relief from being the place everyone joked about. It moved not one guardrail. It built not one sidewalk. It did not put a single streetlight anywhere along 135 miles where 3 out of 4 of the dead were on foot. So if you are ever the one making this drive, and plenty of you will, because it is genuinely one of the great American drives. Do the small, unglamorous things. Give the Coronado Trail the whole day. It takes 3 to 4 hours for about 100 miles, and that is the correct pace, not a slow one. Fuel in Alpine or Clifton, because between them, there is essentially nothing. Check conditions in spring and fall, not just winter, because ice at 9,000 feet does not follow the calendar you are used to. And take the advisory speeds literally. When a sign on that road says 10, it means 10. None of that is exciting. All of it works. Come back one last time to 1926, and a governor standing on new pavement in the mountains of eastern Arizona. George Hunt was there to celebrate something real. That road connected towns that had been effectively cut off from each other. It was hard to build, and it was, on the day it opened, a genuine piece of public good. 12 years later, somebody in an office assigned it the next number in a sequence, and that clerical act did more to shape the road's next 80 years than the engineering ever did. And that is the real number here. Not 666, not 460 curves, not 9,370 feet. It is 15 to 20 a year, on one stretch, for years on end. It is 3 out of 4 of them walking. It is a managing editor at a tribal newspaper being asked what would help, and answering that a new sign would at least make people feel better, because that was what was actually on the table. Now remember what I asked you to hold on to. Almost nobody who died on this road was killed by anything the rename could reach. They were killed by distance, and darkness, and the absence of a shoulder to walk on, and by alcohol in places with very little else, and by a roadbed built for lighter trucks in a different century. Every one of those has a name, a cost, and a department responsible for it. None of them has a horror film. And that is the thing worth carrying out of this, because it is not really a story about a spooky number at all. It is a story about what happens when a genuine, expensive, boring problem gets handed a supernatural explanation. The explanation is more interesting than the problem. It travels further. It gets repeated at gas stations and in comment sections and eventually in movies. And every time it gets repeated, the actual answer gets quieter. The road out there is not cursed and never was. It is 100 years old. It climbs to 9,000 feet. It runs 517 miles from a border to a state line, and it is exactly as difficult today as it was the afternoon a governor stood on it and called it progress. They changed the sign. They left the road. And the road is still there, patient and enormous and entirely indifferent, waiting for the moment your attention slips under a shield that now says 191.